Hey guys, welcome back to another week of site visit. Last week we talked about this in the shop here, this outlet plate cover or switch plate cover, and a lot of you guys had asked how we're going to get this off. There's a couple different scenarios. Number one, I want to answer the question. This gets a traditional outlet receptacle box behind it, so it would be basically a blue plastic box, and there will be no wood between that and the box. It will be completely UL listed, code compliant. One of the questions is, usually you put a screwdriver between here to pop these off. Yes, it is more difficult now that it's recessed, so we've talked about actually shaving down some of these tabs, or even maybe just leaving two of them and using magnets elsewhere. Something we're going to explore. And great suggestion from another viewer about the fact that paint is going to add some thickness, so we will make sure that we're not adding too much thickness that won't be able to come out. I'm going to touch base on a little bit of what we're working on here in the shop. Ian's in the shop today. The rest of the guys are out in the field, and Ian is working on a project, some cabinetry for our Cambridge project, and Ken will touch base on this a little bit more, but this is a manufactured veneer, and this is actually a dyed veneer. So dyed, the colors all the way through. If you guys listened to the podcast last week on the NS Builders podcast, we talk about this a little bit. And what Ian's working on right now is getting all the doors made up. And you know that the way we do anything, especially when it's grained, is going to have this grain match. So you can see everything is labeled here. What Ian's working on is actually edge banding these doors. And he's actually using the Festool Contoro this time rather than our automatic edge bander. And that's another thing we talked about on the podcast last week. And we dig into the reasons as to why. Really excited about this project. Maple isn't a really traditional interior that we're using. We're using a lot of walnut, but in this case, the client wanted something light. We talked about going paint or even a laminate. We ended up going maple, but if you look closely, this isn't a standard radial sawn maple. This is actually a quarter sawn, that's right, quarter sawn maple for the interiors of these. Slightly more traditional to cabinet making with the maple interiors, but with a better graining, and it actually gives this kind of I said almost like a Euro luxe look to the interior. But if you look closely, you know, you have the drawers here, and then over here you actually have a full height door and a kerf cut here. This right here is not actually, this is actually one piece if I move that. But in a future episode of Revealed, you guys will see what that detail looks like and how they achieve that. But I want to show you this before we headed out to our project in Cambridge. We're going to head over there now. HVAC is just about wrapping up, and the guys are back on site doing some detail framing, so I want to walk through some of those details as well as how we worked our register layout for our HVAC for better performance and equally as important, better aesthetics. So let's hop in the truck and head over there now. Guys, so we're over in Cambridge. We just showed you guys the cabinets that we're going to be installing in the entry here. And we actually threw up a lot of these renderings that we did. And this is one of the cabinets that we're talking about. Tucked underneath the stair here, right near the entryway, is this floating cabinet. And then if you follow that line straight up, there's actually a wardrobe, a wardrobe up on the second level. That's where all that gray dyed veneer cabinetry will go, and then the rest of the space we have a ton more millwork. Mike and Ken are actually on site doing some final dimensions. They're running through making sure all the framing is in the spot that needs to be before we get into board. Last time we were here, we were talking about the air handler, and that's been installed, so let's go take a look. So if you guys remember, this is one of 3 air handlers, and you can see this unit's been tucked way up. Brian actually installed some Rockwell comfort board in between the floor joists above just to help some sound transmission. You can see our rubber isolators are installed on the hangers. Really important to make sure this unit is completely isolated. And you can see how thin this ductwork is. And being so thin, it's got to be really wide. And the reason it's so thin is that our ceiling basically skims the bottom of this. So we really have to be as compact as possible. One thing I love Brian and Mike have been doing is all the walls have been getting labeled. So 1/2-inch plywood, 5/8 finished plaster. This is going to be a built-in bookcase, so this will actually be a combo core side that gets plastered in place. So they've went around throughout the whole space and made sure all that stuff is labeled because we're going to be number one, we're near complete with all our mechanical roughs. Number two, we're gonna pull out all the existing fiberglass insulation that you guys keep questioning about. We've left it in for construction, for the neighbors, for sound. All of this is actually coming out, and then we're gonna be laser scanning this whole space next week to make sure that we have complete documentation of where everything is before we re-insulate and reboard. Let's go up on the second level over here where they're continuing the HVAC, and we'll show a couple of the details that we're doing on that. So last time we were here, steel was going in and the temporary treads were being installed, but now they are installed. Let these guys come down first. So beyond just the renderings, Brian's also taken the time to lay out all of our HVAC locations, return, supply, dimensions. The architect was really particular about where things landed. We wanted to make sure that aesthetically everything looked good. You know, you can step back here and kind of look up and see just how tight a lot of this equipment is. You know, a lot of that ductwork, while it might appear it's kind of crushed up there, it's laid out in a way that allows these units to still be serviceable, which is, you know, incredibly important. What you're looking at here is actually the ERV unit, and that ERV is essentially exhausting the stale air and then bringing in fresh air. But in doing that, it's actually transferring the energy, so the heat as well as the humidity of that air is transferring to make sure that the stuff coming back in is up to temperature, or closer to temperature, I should say. So with respect to the HVAC, you know, these guys, everything has been laid out for them. All the locations have been prepped. So now they're just bringing their ductwork to these locations and making sure that they're installed accordingly. Again, you know, we want to make sure we take the time up front, work with our trades, make sure that all these locations, just like the electrical in, you know, our previous episode, all these locations are discussed ahead of time, planned for, laid out, and even maybe framed for, so our mechanical trades can bring their location to it, and we're setting them up for success. So I just wanted to walk through, show you guys a couple of the products that we're going to be using. So big part of, you know, spending all the time on aesthetically laying out the ductwork and the supplies and returns, you know, we want to be using a nice quality plastered in register. It gives us this flange. This will be attached to our blue board, and you get this leading edge here that the plaster will be brought up to, leaving just the linear slots on the exposed once the wall is done, and this all gets painted wall color. So it gives us a nice clean look. So taking the time to aesthetically lay things out, work with the architect, and then using a quality grill such as this one makes a big difference. And, you know, it's nice. This is all made out of all aluminum, and all the corners are actually welded for a nice sturdy product that will last a long time. I talk about sound a lot on this project, and we have a unit, a home on this side and a home on that side. And you can see this wall, a lot of the insulation's already been taken out. And you see right here, so basically this box right here is going into the neighbor's unit. So any sound that might transfer into their box, say on their side, is coming out here. And this wall is really important. You can see that, or what we've talked about before, is that this is going to be a hat track on isolation clips, 2 layers of board with acoustical glue, rock wool in the cavities. We want to do everything we can to prevent sound from transmitting from here to there and there to here. So we're actually using this product called putty pads. So it's wrapped in plastic, but if I peel this back a little bit, it's really like putty or clay, or it's actually really sticky. But what we're going to do is take this off, and then you wrap this. I'm not going to do it right now, and you'll see that in a future episode. You know, essentially encasing that box. So as sound transmits into that box, this is a really dense material. It's not going to allow it to pour through. Say if it was foam or even just the rock wool insulation around it. This is going to help combat a lot of that transfer of sound. And Mike, remember how much these were? So at roughly $4 a piece, you know, there's not hundreds of them, but it's a fair amount of them in a little bit of time to make these work. There's 60 total. Like I said, not 100, but 60. And you know, at 60, you know, at $4 a piece, it's a couple $100 to help combat that sound. One last detail I wanted to show before we took off out of here: the electrical. So oftentimes with low voltage, you find these things taped to the wall and say, hey, poke this out at X elevation. simple things like a piece of plastic screwed to the stud with a hole in it allows this wire to stick there, so we know exactly where it needs to be and it doesn't get moved. You know, we can mark it all we want. We can put a piece of cardboard there all we want, but a piece of plastic like that, it's going to be a lot more durable. You put a hole through it, you pull your wire out, and that way you know where it is. And that's, again, going back to why we're going to 3D scan this place. The board guys might miss that, and that might get pushed back, and we might forget to pull it out of the wall. We can always go back and locate exactly where that is. So, great progress here at our Cambridge project. I'm excited to see kind of these mechanicals wrapped up. Like I said, we're going to show you this 3D scan in a future episode and see what that looks like, to see what that final product is and why we're doing it, and then the benefit of having that kind of in our in our document folder for when we complete this job. For, you know, say we have to do a renovation, or have to, you know, God forbid, we have to find a leak that happened. You know, we have that ability to do that by looking into the walls once everything's covered up. And of course, we're going to start talking about our parting wall and how we're going to further combat sound beyond those putty pads. Doug, I don't know if you caught when Ken, Mike, and myself were talking in the corner when we first walked in, but they actually went over to our Metro West project, the super modern one we did a couple months ago. And I just want to show you guys, like, I'm going to try to draw upside down here, but we had this wall with cabinetry in it that is essentially a big bank of drawers, and they float above the floor. And they float above the floor, I think it's under 16 inches. Ken, do you remember? So 10 1/4 inches off the floor. Essentially what we have is this dresser that's wall to wall. It's about 22 inches deep, and it's supported by these steel brackets that are in the wall. There's a handful of them that help support that. But what we found over time is that, over a short amount of time, is that this point, I'm going to draw a drastic line, but it sagged in the middle. And the guys measured it, it's only about 1/8 of an inch. So it's not terrible, but it's enough where, you know, that throws off our 3/32 reveals. So, you know, Mike and Ken had a great idea, is that underneath this center section here is, you know, you have a vertical piece of plywood in that cabinet construction, and they want to add a steel bracket underneath the very middle vertical, and then they can have a plate on the wall that would bolt into the framing. Now, obviously you don't want to see that, but being 10 1/4 inches, it's also in this narrow hallway. The hallway is, you know, less than 3 feet wide, and there's never a point where you can actually visually see that. So I'm going to draw it over here. So if I'm looking at it, here's the floor again, here's my cabinet depth. Okay, so they would essentially add a steel bracket like this, and that would we would essentially jack up the dresser to make sure it's perfectly level, put that steel bracket under it, so that helps support the weight and gets that 1/8 inch sag. And we're talking 1/8 inch over nearly 7 feet or so. I think this is a great solution. I think that makes, you know, that fixes the problem. Now, one thing I had added to that is, you know, okay, well, it fixes the solution, maybe never have to go back to it, but what happens if it does need adjustment once again? So what we were chatting about is taking that L bracket, and I'm just going to draw it like this, right? So taking that L bracket, here's, you know, bolted into the wall here, and then we were saying that this would support. Why not take another piece of plate, say 1/8 inch thick, that would sit on top of this, and then in this one here, let me erase that for a second. In this one here, maybe drill 6 holes and put set screws in them. And what that would do is that 1/8 inch plate would sit on top of here, and then we'd have these set screws underneath with an Allen wrench. So if we ever had to adjust it again, you could get underneath with an Allen wrench, stick the Allen wrench in that set screw, spin it, and it would come up out of that hole, thus pushing that plate up, allowing some adjustment. And, you know, you can make those set screws as long as you want, but that steel here, it's a 1/2 inch. So your set screw is going to be at least a 1/2 inch, and once you start pushing up, that, you know, really gives you let's call it a 1/4 inch of play, so an 1/8 inch, you're going to be able to adjust that long term. So this right here is a solution that fixes the problem now, but also gives us the opportunity to adjust it later should that come back up. You know, I really appreciate when we all get to kind of sit down and talk about, you know, a problem and how we're going to approach it, because everyone brings so much to the table. Like I said, Mike and Ken came up with the idea of putting the bracket under there, and then we, you know, chatted about adding this adjustability for future proofing. So that's what I have the most fun at. So we're gonna go to another project. We're gonna introduce a new project, and I'll walk you through it. That's some big steel. Guys, we are at our new project here. It's project 171. This is a new build. So we have this awesome existing house that, you know, just doesn't really meet the mark in a lot of ways. So this is actually going to be demolished, and we're going to be building a new house here. The overall size of the new house is actually going to be very similar, and we're repositioning it to be parallel with the street. But it's going to be built to a much higher level. We're talking about passive construction, and not necessarily going to be certified with it, certified passive, but we're going to be taking a lot of building practices in mind when we're building it. So number one, the house, you know, behind here, old cottage, 50+ feet above sea level, and, you know, looking at it here, street side, ocean side, and on the back here you have this retaining wall. You see this awesome chain fence or something. This is all going to be kind of redone, and we're planning on doing a cast in place concrete wall, hopefully a board form detail or something like that. Reworking these stairs, but we're going to keep the elevation drop, so you're at street elevation on the street side, so you have a single story with a traditional gable roof, and then on the back you actually have a walkout basement, and we're going to have this awesome wraparound deck on the back here. Not cantilever, it's actually going to be sitting on round galvanized posts with a probably cable rail system, and the entire outside of the house is actually going to be wrapped in white cedar. We're talking about different roof materials, probably going in asphalt, but preparing it for solar. We also have some awesome skylight details that pour in from the front through a light well that's going to basically fill the whole back of the house. Now, speaking of the back of the house, this right here where you see this bank of 5 windows, if you can envision, that's actually going to be all glass corner, and then the whole back of the house is going to be glass. We're going to be working with Schoen windows on this project, and it's a triple glaze unit, high performance. And we're going to have these massive units, and they're going to actually tuck back into a pocket system, so we have this unobstructed view. We're also going to have this awesome 4-foot overhang on the roof system here. But the cool things about this, going back to the energy efficiency, is that we're going to be using no foam products in the entire home, and we're going to be partnering with Rockwell on this project, and we're going to be using their comfort board as well as their comfort bat. That comfort board, we're going to be using it underneath the concrete slab insulation, which it is rated for. That's something I believe, I could be wrong, and I'll check on this, but I believe it was something that they recently developed. We're also going to be using it for below grade on the foundation wall. And then on the outside of the house, we're actually going to have 2 layers of comfort board, and then 2 layers of comfort board on the roof as well. So this entire house is going to be wrapped, you know, with that first layer of sheathing, which is going to be our air layer. Inboard of that, you're going to have that insulation, and then outboard of that air layer, you're going to have the additional layers of semi-rigid comfort board insulation on the whole house. And then on top of that, you get that second layer of sheathing, and that is where that's giving you your backer for your cedar shingle siding. So we have some really great partners on this project. I wanted to give you kind of an introduction to it, see what it is, see where we're located here on the water, and you know what we've been working on the last couple of weeks. If you walk up on the street here, you're going to see spray paint markings. So one of the first things that we do is we call dig safe. Anytime you're doing any excavation, you got to do that. 811 on your phone. You give them a call. They come out. They basically notify all the utility companies in the area, and they're going to come out and mark everything. A couple things with that, they've marked the water, so we have to cut and cap the water since we're demolishing this house. You also have to cut and cap the sewer if it was sewer. And this house actually is on an old cesspool, which will be removed and will be tied into the sewer. Great thing is I actually talked to the sewer department and was able to get some of the records of when they installed this sewer years ago, and they teed off, headed into the direction of this house many years ago. I believe it was in the 80s. So it's prepped for a sewer connection. So we don't have to cut and cap it now, but we will have a T to tie into when we build the new house. We also have to cut and cap the gas. So we've notified the gas as well as the electrical company, and they're going to come out. Gas are going to cut and cap at the street. We're in discussion as whether or not we're going to bring it back into the house, because being so airtight and so high performing, we're probably going to go with a heat pump system for the heating and cooling, and reducing the need for gas by using, say, an induction cooktop. And then lastly, electrical. So what we're going to do is we're going to have our electrician come out. You can actually see up on the driveway here. Why don't we take a walk? We'll walk over here. So you can actually see on the driveway here, we have a telephone pole right, I would say, in the middle of the driveway-ish. That pole is actually not going to be moved. We're going to be relocating the driveway a little bit. But what we'll do is we're actually going to set up a temporary electrical pole off to the side. And what that will allow us to do is the electrical company will come out, disconnect it off the house. Now the house is safe. We'll bring it there and hit our temporary pole. And that way we're not running generators at any point in this project. We're making the disconnect and utilizing the time that our electrician and the grid provider is on site, doing that all in one sweep. And like I said, not dealing with any generators on site. We have a temporary electric service set up, ready for construction. And then when we're ready, we're gonna actually bury a new service underground so we don't have any overhead wires. And like I said, this is, roughly where the new house is gonna be. Same thing, it's gonna be a single level from the street, with a garage off here, and then this awesome breezeway through here. And you guys have to stay tuned, because traditionally you would just do a slab on grade for that garage and that breezeway would be disconnected. Well, that not here. It's gonna have one continuous basement underneath the breezeway as well as the garage. So we're gonna be doing a structural steel metal deck in the garage to suspend a concrete slab, so you have a workshop below the space. Really creative, and some finicky and tricky details in an otherwise pretty small project, which makes it even more interesting for us. As always, guys, we appreciate you hanging out on these site visits. Let us know below what you like the most by adding a timestamp. Make sure you subscribe, turn on notifications, share this with a friend. We love the feedback that you guys are giving us. And then stay tuned for tomorrow for another episode of Revealed, and then Thursday for another episode of the NS Builders Podcast. We appreciate you guys.